The hangar filled with tension as she climbed into the Apache. Mocking laughter rippled through the crowd of officers, while the colonel smirked. "Careful, sweetheart. That Apache is not a toy." Her face remained calm, focused, unreadable as she strapped in. What happened next left everyone frozen in disbelief. The pre-dawn air at Fort Riggs carried a biting chill that seeped through Major Astrovonic's uniform as she crossed the darkened base. Most buildings remained silent, but light already spilled from the Apache hangar, where mechanics worked under harsh fluorescence, preparing helicopters for the day's demonstration. Astrid's boots crunched rhythmically against the gravel, her pace steady and unhurried, despite knowing she was cutting it close. In her quarters, she had lingered longer than usual, staring at the small photograph hidden beneath her other personal items. A habit she couldn't seem to break, though it threatened to make her late. She never touched it, just looked, then closed the drawer with practiced precision. The hangar door slid open with a metallic groan that announced her arrival. Several heads turned, conversations briefly pausing before resuming at a lower volume. Astrid felt their eyes track her movement, but kept her gaze forward, expression neutral. Colonel Warren Blackwood stood near the center of the hangar, surrounded by a cluster of officers in dress uniforms, bearing insignia that marked them as Pentagon officials. Their presence explained the heightened tension crackling through the space like static electricity. "Today, we're showcasing the future of our aerial combat division," Blackwood announced, his deep voice projecting authority. "Our elite pilots will demonstrate the maneuvers that have made our unit the standard bearer for the entire Army aviation branch." Astrid noted how he emphasized elite, his gaze deliberately avoiding her as she moved to the briefing area where flight plans were laid out. She picked up her designated folder and began reviewing its contents. Captain Thaddeus Ridge approached, offering a steaming cup that smelled of military-grade coffee. "Nervous?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Astrid accepted the coffee without looking up. "Should I be?" Ridge shrugged, leaning against the table beside her. Unlike most at Fort Riggs, he'd never seemed bothered by her presence. "Pentagon's watching." Blackwood's wound tighter than usual. "So, a normal Tuesday," she replied, turning a page in her flight plan. A burst of laughter drew their attention to a group of pilots gathered near the main Apache. All men, all with years of combat experience stamped into their bearing. Their laughter cut short as Astrid's gaze met theirs. "Political appointment," one muttered, just loud enough to carry. "Diversity hire," another added with a smirk. Astrid's expression remained unchanged as she returned to her review, but Ridge noticed her knuckles whitening around her coffee cup. Across the hangar, Colonel Blackwood had finished with the officials and was now examining the roster for the day's demonstrations. His frown deepened as he spotted a particular entry. He beckoned to Major Zephyr Carrington, his executive officer, a tall man with a perpetually concerned expression. "Vonik is scheduled for the vertical recovery demonstration." Blackwood's tone made the question sound like an accusation. Carrington nodded. "Yes, sir. She has the most flight hours in that maneuver of anyone on base." "On simulation," Blackwood corrected sharply. "This is a live demonstration with Pentagon brass watching. We can't afford uncertainty." "Her simulator scores are unprecedented, sir," Carrington replied, a hint of careful defense in his voice. "The system can barely track her recovery times. Simulators don't account for actual G-forces or real wind conditions," Blackwood said, "or pressure, or the complexity of managing a $30 million weapon system with lives at stake." Carrington hesitated, then leaned slightly closer. "There's something about her. You should—" Blackwood cut him off with a dismissive wave. "I've made my decision. Move her to the end of the roster. If we have time, she can fly." "Sir, with respect, that's an order, Major." Blackwood's tone left no room for discussion as he turned away. Astrid watched from across the hangar as Carrington reluctantly approached the demonstration board and moved her name to the bottom slot. Their eyes met briefly before he turned away, his expression apologetic, but resigned. She nodded almost imperceptibly, accepting the slight without visible reaction. The hangar grew more crowded as the remaining pilots arrived and support staff finalized preparations. At 0800 sharp, Colonel Blackwood called everyone to attention for the formal briefing. Pentagon officials stood off to one side, evaluating everything with calculating eyes. Today isn't just a demonstration. Blackwood began, surveying the assembled pilots. It's an evaluation that will determine funding allocations for the Apache program moving forward. What these gentlemen see today directly impacts our operational capacity next fiscal year. He paused to let that sink in. So, I want perfect execution. No mistakes, no showboating. By-the-book excellence only. His gaze lingered on Astrid longer than necessary. Some of you might be tempted to push boundaries to impress our guests. Don't. This isn't the time for experimentation or maverick tactics. The briefing continued with technical details and safety protocols. Afterward, as the pilots dispersed to prepare, Astrid reviewed her modified flight plan and noticed all challenging maneuvers had been replaced with basic flight patterns, the kind used for cadet training. Problem, Major? Blackwood asked suddenly beside her, watching her examine the changes. No, sir, Astrid replied, her voice steady. Just confirming the adjustments. Good, he nodded, seemingly satisfied. Remember, this isn't a competition. It's about showcasing reliable, predictable performance. As she turned to leave, he added casually, and Vonik, try not to break anything this time. The comment drew subtle smirks from nearby officers. Astrid's shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly, but she offered no response as she walked away. In the locker room, now empty except for her, Astrid removed a folded newspaper clipping from her pocket, her one concession to sentiment. She unfolded it carefully, revealing a headline about a helicopter crash from 4 years earlier. The word soul was visible in the subheading before she heard footsteps and quickly refolded it as Captain Ridge entered. They're setting you up to fail, Ridge said quietly, leaning against the lockers. I'm aware, she replied, tucking the clipping away. Why do you stay? With your hours, any civilian outfit would. I have my reasons, she interrupted, closing her locker with finality. Ridge studied her for a moment. You know, in the 6 months you've been here, that's the closest thing to a personal detail I've heard from you. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Don't get used to it. Outside, the day had brightened considerably, the sun burning away the morning chill. The demonstration area had been prepared with the Apache helicopters arranged in formation. Pentagon officials occupied a sheltered viewing stand, while base personnel gathered at a respectful distance. As Astrid walked toward her pre-flight inspection, she passed Lieutenant Freya Okafor, a junior pilot who had recently joined the base. Unlike most, Okafor's expression contained no judgment, only barely concealed admiration. Major Vonik, she acknowledged formally. Lieutenant. Astrid returned with a nod, continuing on her way. The demonstrations began promptly. One by one, pilots took their Apaches through carefully choreographed maneuvers, showcasing the helicopter's capabilities with textbook precision. Each demonstration concluded with polite applause from the officials. As morning stretched into afternoon, the temperature rose along with the tension. Colonel Blackwood checked his watch repeatedly as the final scheduled demonstration concluded. With a satisfied expression, he began ushering the officials toward the briefing room. Gentlemen, if you'll follow me, we've prepared a technical overview of the combat systems we've just demonstrated. What about Major Vonik? One official asked, consulting the roster. We haven't seen her demonstration. Blackwood's expression tightened momentarily before he forced a smile. Unfortunately, time constraints have. We can wait, the official insisted, his tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. I've heard interesting things about your female Apache pilot. The other officials murmured in agreement, clearly unwilling to leave without seeing the complete roster. Blackwood's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, he conceded. One final demonstration. He turned and signaled to Astrid, who stood waiting by her helicopter. She acknowledged with a crisp nod and began her pre-flight checklist. Blackwood approached her before she could climb into the cockpit. Keep it simple, basic maneuvers only, he said, his voice low but firm. That's an order. Astrid met his gaze directly. Understood, sir. Blackwood returned to the viewing area, muttering to Major Carrington. This should be interesting. Let's hope the maintenance crew checked her machine twice. Lieutenant Okafor, standing nearby, caught the comment and frowned slightly. As Astrid climbed into the cockpit, Blackwood announced loudly to the assembled crowd. Careful, sweetheart. That Apache is not a toy. Laughter rippled through the officers present. Astrid secured her helmet, her expression hidden as the rotors began to turn, their rhythmic thudding building to a roar that drowned out the lingering chuckles. Lieutenant Okafor approached Captain Ridge as the helicopter lifted off. What's the history between them? She asked, nodding toward Blackwood. Ridge kept his eyes on the ascending Apache. That's what everyone wants to know. The helicopter lifted smoothly into the air, hovering momentarily before moving into position. For several minutes, Astrid executed perfect textbook maneuvers, the same basic patterns the other pilots had demonstrated. The officials nodded appreciatively, but without enthusiasm. Colonel Blackwood relaxed slightly, watching the routine demonstration with satisfaction. See? Nothing special, just standard. His words cut off as the Apache suddenly banked sharply right, abandoning the flight pattern. The helicopter's radio crackled through the command speaker. Command, requesting permission to demonstrate recovery from extreme angle of attack. Before Blackwood could respond, the Apache accelerated into a steep climb, the nose pointing almost directly upward. What the hell is she doing? Blackwood grabbed his radio. Vonik, return to approved flight pattern immediately. That's an order. The radio remained silent as the helicopter continued its ascent, the sound of its engines changing pitch as it pushed against gravity. Major Carrington checked his tablet, which displayed the helicopter's telemetry. Sir, she's approaching stall parameters. Ground her now. Blackwood's face reddened. Get tower control to override her system. Tower can't override in flight, sir, Carrington reminded him, tension evident in his voice. Only emergency shutdown, which would... I know what it would do, Blackwood snapped. Get medical on standby. On the ground, personnel had stopped whatever they were doing. All eyes now tracked the Apache as it climbed higher. Lieutenant Okafor approached Captain Ridge, alarm clear on her face. Is she trying to kill herself? Ridge's eyes remained fixed on the ascending helicopter, a strange calmness in his expression. Just watch. At nearly 10,000 feet, with everyone holding their breath, the Apache did something no one expected. It began to roll sideways. She's lost control, Blackwood hissed, his knuckles white around his radio. Get emergency response teams ready. But as the helicopter completed its roll, it became clear this was no accident. The Apache executed a perfect inverted loop, a maneuver considered nearly impossible in the heavy attack helicopter. The Pentagon officials gasped, then exchanged looks of astonishment. One began filming with his phone. As the Apache righted itself and began a controlled descent, Major Carrington quietly said to Blackwood, Sir, that maneuver isn't in any training manual. Because it's suicidal, Blackwood snapped. But his expression showed more than anger. There was confusion, even fear. The Apache performed 3 more complex maneuvers in rapid succession, each one showcasing the helicopter's capabilities in ways none of the previous demonstrations had approached. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the aircraft moved through the air with impossible precision. Lieutenant Okafor noticed a maintenance technician watching with a strange expression. Not surprise, but recognition. "You've seen her fly like this before?" she asked. The technician hesitated, glancing around before responding. "Not supposed to talk about it." "About what?" Okafor pressed. The technician shook his head. "Ask someone with higher clearance." The Apache approached the landing zone, rotors slowing as it touched down with perfect precision. Colonel Blackwood was already marching toward it, his expression thunderous. The Pentagon officials followed at a more measured pace, their faces showing a mix of amazement and keen interest. Astrid emerged from the cockpit, removing her helmet. Her face remained composed as she descended to the tarmac, standing at attention as Blackwood reached her. "What part of basic maneuvers only was unclear, Major?" His voice carried across the tarmac. Astrid maintained perfect military bearing. "I demonstrated a recovery technique, sir." "You demonstrated insubordination and reckless endangerment of a $30 million aircraft." The Pentagon officials approached, their expressions much different from Blackwood's. "Colonel," one said, "that was the most impressive Apache handling I've ever witnessed." Blackwood faltered for only a moment. "With respect, sir, what you witnessed was a pilot ignoring direct orders and safety protocols." Another official interjected. "Actually, Colonel, those maneuvers are exactly what we came to see. Advanced recovery techniques that exceed current training parameters." Blackwood looked confused. "Advanced recovery? Those maneuvers aren't in any training program." "Not in yours," the official agreed, then looked at Astrid with new understanding. "Colonel Blackwood," Major Carrington interrupted, approaching with a tablet extended. "Sir, there's something about Major Vonik you need to see." "Her complete file, sir," Carrington explained, keeping his voice low. "I received clearance this morning. What we had before was only partial information." The Pentagon officials exchanged knowing glances as Blackwood began to scroll through the document. His expression shifted from annoyance to confusion, then to disbelief. "This says she served 3 tours in..." His voice trailed off as he continued reading. "Yes, sir," Carrington confirmed quietly. "And she was the test pilot for..." "Yes, sir." "And the incident at Khyber Pass." Carrington nodded solemnly. "That's why I've been trying to speak with you about her assignment here." The officials watched Blackwood's reaction with calculated interest, while the gathered personnel remained at a respectful distance, straining to hear what was happening. Lieutenant Okafor edged closer to Captain Ridge. "What are they talking about?" Ridge kept his voice low, his eyes never leaving Astrid, who remained at perfect attention despite the growing tension. "The mission no one talks about 4 years ago. Apache down in hostile territory. Pilot presumed dead." "But clearly not dead," Okafor whispered. "Not just not dead," Ridge corrected. "The story is, she flew a damaged Apache 200 miles to safety using techniques no one thought possible. Modified the control systems mid-flight. Saved an entire team. That's her." Okafor's eyes widened. "Then why is she here being treated like a rookie?" Ridge shrugged slightly. "That's the question, isn't it?" Blackwood looked up from the tablet, seeing Astrid as if for the first time. The anger had drained from his face, replaced by something closer to unease. "Why wasn't I informed of this before now?" One of the officials stepped forward. "The program needed unbiased evaluation, Colonel. We needed to see if her methods would be accepted on merit, not reputation. And if her methods were rejected due to bias rather than merit," another added pointedly. "We needed to know that too." The implication hung in the air between them. Blackwood struggled to maintain composure as he realized the position he was in. The entire demonstration, his treatment of Astrid, the command decisions he'd made for months, were all being evaluated. "You were testing my command, not her flying," he said quietly. "We were testing the culture," the official corrected. "The Apache program needs innovation to survive, but innovation needs the right environment." As this conversation unfolded, the maintenance crew and other pilots had begun to whisper among themselves. Personnel, who had laughed at Blackwood's earlier comment, now looked uncertain, their expressions shifting as they glanced between Astrid and the officials. Lieutenant Okafor caught fragments of conversation from nearby groups. The ghost pilot single-handedly rescued, modified the control systems herself. The whispers grew, spreading through the assembled personnel as pieces of Astrid's true history emerged from secrecy. Blackwood handed the tablet back to Carrington, his authority visibly shaken. He turned to Astrid, who had remained at attention throughout this exchange. "Why didn't you say anything, Major, all this time?" Astrid's response was measured. "My orders were to integrate and assess, sir, not to command special treatment." A Pentagon official checked his watch. "Colonel Blackwood, we need to discuss the next phase of the initiative. Major Vonnick's demonstration has proven what we hope to confirm." "What initiative?" Blackwood asked, the question directed at no one in particular. "The Advanced Aerial Recovery Program," the official replied. "It's all in the briefing materials you'll receive momentarily." As they moved toward the briefing room, Blackwood hesitated, looking back at Astrid, still standing by her Apache. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face, the realization dawning that he had been systematically undermining one of the most decorated pilots in the program. Lieutenant Okafor approached Astrid as the crowd dispersed. "Is it true what they're saying about Khyber Pass?" Before Astrid could answer, they were interrupted by the arrival of a helicopter on the far pad. The distinctive sound of its rotors cut through the ambient noise of the base, drawing attention. A group of soldiers disembarked, among them a tall figure moving with the help of a cane. Astrid's composure slipped for the first time as she saw this person. Her hand moved unconsciously to the pocket where she kept the worn photograph. A gesture so subtle that only someone watching closely would notice. "Major," Okafor prompted, noticing the change. Astrid's attention remained fixed on the distant figure. Her voice, when she finally spoke, carried an undertone Okafor hadn't heard before. "Lieutenant, prepare the simulator lab. We start training on the new recovery techniques tomorrow at 600. "Yes, ma'am," Okafor replied, recognizing a dismissal. As Okafor left, Astrid took a step toward the newly arrived soldiers, then stopped herself. The figure with the cane seemed to sense her gaze and turned slowly in her direction. Even at a distance, a moment of recognition passed between them. A history unspoken but palpable in the stillness that followed. Astrid's radio crackled, breaking the moment. "Major Vonnick, report to briefing room immediately. Operation Thunderbird is now active." Her expression shifted back to professional detachment. But as she turned away, her hand again touched the hidden photograph in her pocket. She strode toward the command building, her posture revealing nothing of the emotions that had briefly surfaced. In the briefing room, tension electrified the air. Maps and satellite imagery covered the screens as Colonel Blackwood addressed a now expanded group that included the Pentagon officials, senior pilots, and Major Vonnick. The room had the charged atmosphere that preceded high-risk operations familiar to everyone present. 30 minutes ago, a Special Forces team went dark near the Karakoram Pass, Blackwood explained, indicating a remote mountain region on the central display. Their last transmission reported mechanical failure and hostile forces converging on their position. He gestured to a map showing treacherous mountain terrain with elevation markers that made several officers shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly. Standard extraction is impossible. The team has approximately 4 hours of oxygen remaining in their survival shelter. A Pentagon official interjected. This wasn't supposed to activate until next week. The new systems aren't fully integrated. Enemy forces don't follow our scheduling, Blackwood responded grimly. This is now a real-world rescue operation. He surveyed the room, his expression grave. I need volunteers for an extreme conditions extraction. Given the altitude and weather, this qualifies as a suicide mission. Before he finished speaking, Astrid stepped forward. I'll take it. Captain Ridge joined her immediately. I'll co-pilot. The room fell silent. Blackwood studied them both, his earlier antagonism replaced by grave concern. The terrain exceeds even your demonstrated capabilities, Major. Wind speeds alone will make conventional approach impossible. That's why I'm volunteering, sir, Astrid replied. Conventional won't work. The room remained silent as Blackwood considered. Finally, he nodded. Prep for immediate departure. The rest of you, support stations. As the room cleared, Blackwood called, Major Vonneck, a moment. When they were alone, his demeanor changed completely. The commanding presence dimmed, replaced by something more human. I owe you an apology, but that's for later. Right now, I need to know. Can you actually pull this off? The maneuvers I demonstrated weren't for show, Colonel. They were developed specifically for scenarios like this. Why didn't you push back all these months? With respect, sir, this mission is why I didn't. The program needs pilots who can follow orders and commanders who give the right ones. Testing both was necessary. Blackwood absorbed this, nodding slowly. The team leader at Karakoram. Do you know who it is? Astrid's composure wavered slightly. Major Calloway, your husband. She did not confirm or deny, simply said, I'll bring them back, sir. As Astrid headed to her helicopter, the base had erupted into coordinated chaos. Ground crews prepared the Apache, while others monitored weather patterns and enemy movements. The mission had transformed the atmosphere from demonstration to deadly serious operation. At the edge of the tarmac, she encountered the figure with the cane, Major Evander Calloway. Battle-scarred but standing tall despite his injury. His face, weathered beyond his 38 years, showed a complex mix of emotions when he saw her. Astrid, he said quietly, you shouldn't be here, Evander. When I heard Thunderbird activated early, he stopped, searching her face. It's Zeke out there, isn't it? My brother. She nodded once, her expression tightly controlled. The brass is calling it impossible. They're saying extraction can't be done. That's why I'm going. Evander stepped closer, his voice dropping further. 4 years ago, you flew through hell to bring me home. Cost you everything. Not everything, she countered softly. They buried what you did, made you start over, took away your recognition. Recognition wasn't why I did it. He touched the insignia on her uniform. You should be a colonel by now. Instead, you let them treat you like a rookie. The program matters more than rank, Evander. You know that. And my brother, he matters most of all. Their eyes held for a moment, years of history passing between them without words. Then Evander nodded once and stepped back. Fly safe. At the Apache, final preparations were underway. Technical crews swarmed around the helicopter, making last-minute adjustments based on weather forecasts and terrain data. Lieutenant Okafor rushed up with updated weather reports. Ma'am, conditions are deteriorating faster than predicted. Command is considering scrubbing the mission. Not an option, Lieutenant. Astrid reviewed the data. The numbers confirmed what she already knew. The narrow window of opportunity closing with each passing minute. Okafor hesitated, then asked, The techniques you demonstrated earlier, they're for this, aren't they? For when normal protocols fail. Every maneuver serves a purpose, Lieutenant. Remember that. As Astrid climbed into the cockpit, Colonel Blackwood approached with the Pentagon officials. The base personnel had gathered to watch the departure, the mood somber as the stakes became clear to everyone. "Major Vonnegut," Blackwood said formally, "before you depart, there's something that needs to be addressed." The officials stepped forward, and to everyone's shock, they removed insignia from their uniforms, revealing different ranks entirely. "Major Astrid Vonnegut," one said, now displaying the stars of a general. "Operation Thunderbird was scheduled as the final phase of your evaluation. Today's events have accelerated our timeline." Thus, General produced a document. 4 years ago, your actions at Khyber Pass saved 12 lives at great personal cost. Your subsequent work developing extreme recovery techniques has redefined what we thought possible with the Apache platform. He handed the document to Colonel Blackwood, who read it with increasing surprise. "By order of the Joint Chiefs," Blackwood announced, his voice carrying across the tarmac. "Major Astrid Vonnegut is hereby promoted to the rank of Lieutenant Colonel, effective immediately." Gasps and murmurs spread through the gathered personnel. "Furthermore," he continued, "she is appointed director of the newly established Extreme Aerial Recovery Division, with full authority to implement training protocols across all Apache units." The general added, "Your reputation was temporarily obscured for security reasons, Colonel Vonnegut. That ends today." Astrid remained composed, despite the unexpected recognition. "Sir, with respect, we have a team waiting for extraction." "Understood." The general nodded. "Colonel Blackwood will oversee the operation from command. You have full tactical authority." As this exchange concluded, the base personnel had gathered in increasing numbers. The whispered legends about Astrid now confirmed publicly. Those who had dismissed her earlier stood uncomfortable, their previous judgments exposed as ignorance. Colonel Blackwood stepped forward and, in a gesture that stunned everyone, offered Astrid a crisp salute. "The Apache is yours, Colonel Vonnegut. Bring our people home." The entire base followed suit, coming to attention in unified respect. As Astrid returned the salute and donned her helmet, Evander Calloway watched with pride and concern from the edge of the tarmac. She caught his eye one last time before the cockpit closed. Captain Ridge, already in the co-pilot seat, said quietly, "They finally got it right." "The mission isn't over yet," Astrid responded, starting the engines. As the Apache lifted off, Colonel Blackwood turned to the gathered personnel. "Today, we witnessed what happens when we judge capability, not category. Let that be the standard moving forward." The helicopter accelerated into the darkening sky, rotors cutting through gathering clouds as Astrid Vonnegut flew toward the impossible once more, not as an underestimated outsider, but as the recognized pioneer she always was. The command center fell into tense silence as the Apache disappeared from visual range. Only the steady ping of tracking systems and occasional radio communications broke the quiet. Colonel Blackwood stationed himself at the central console, eyes fixed on the mission telemetry. "How long until they reach the extraction point?" he asked. "At current speed, 2 hours 40 minutes, an operator responded. "But the storm system is moving faster than predicted. They'll hit severe conditions in approximately 90 minutes. "Can they go around it?" "No, sir. The storm covers the entire approach corridor." Blackwood nodded grimly. "Keep me updated on any changes. I want minute-by-minute reports." In the helicopter, Astrid and Ridge flew in focused concentration, the Apache pushing its speed limits as they raced against deteriorating conditions. The sky ahead darkened ominously, towering clouds building into impenetrable walls. "Command reports the storm's accelerating," Ridge announced, checking their instruments. "Forecast now shows sustained winds at 80 knots with gusts over 100, temperature dropping rapidly." "What's the team's status?" Astrid asked, making minute adjustments to their course. "Last communication reported shelter compromised, oxygen supplies damaged. They've gone to emergency protocols." Astrid processed this information without visible reaction. "We need to push faster. Calculate maximum fuel burn for time optimization. Ridge looked up. That would leave us with minimal reserves for return. We won't need reserves if we don't reach them in time. He nodded, recalibrating their systems. Course adjusted. New ETA 2 hours 15 minutes. The helicopter surged forward, engines straining as Astrid pushed the machine beyond its normal operational parameters. The smooth flight became more aggressive, the Apache cutting through increasing turbulence as they approached the storm front. At base, tension mounted as tracking showed the helicopter's accelerated pace. Major Evander Calloway had positioned himself in the corner of the command center, his presence tolerated due to the circumstances. His eyes never left the tracking screen, his hand gripping his cane with white knuckles. "They're approaching the storm boundary," an operator announced. "Conditions deteriorating rapidly." "Can we maintain communications?" Blackwood asked. "Intermittent at best, sir. Once they enter the main storm cell, we'll likely lose contact completely." The command center fell silent as this reality sank in. Evander shifted his weight, a subtle movement that drew Blackwood's attention. "Major Calloway," Blackwood acknowledged, approaching him. "I understand the personal stake you have in this mission." Evander nodded once. "My brother is out there. And Vonnegut." "You were on the Khyber Pass mission," Blackwood stated, rather than asked. "I was the only survivor she found alive." Evander's voice remained steady, but emotion flickered beneath the surface. Everyone else had given up. She didn't. What happened out there? The full story never made it into official records. Evander's gaze remained on the tracking screen. "Our helicopter went down in hostile territory. Enemy forces closing in. Command deemed extraction too risky." He paused. "Astrid took an Apache against orders. Flew into conditions similar to these. Found us by modifying the thermal imaging systems to detect faint heat signatures. And when she found you, the Apache was hit during approach. Critical systems damaged. She landed anyway, pulled me out while under fire, then flew a crippled helicopter 200 miles through enemy airspace." He finally looked at Blackwood. "She should have died that day. We both should have. Instead, she created new flight techniques on the spot, adapting to the damage in real time." Blackwood absorbed this information. "And afterward, officially, she was reprimanded for disobeying orders. Unofficially, her methods were studied and incorporated into advanced training, but her career stalled. They buried her in administrative positions until this program needed testing." "And you?" Evander's expression hardened. "They gave me medals for surviving, then medical discharge when my injuries prevented full recovery." He tapped his cane against the floor. "I requested to stay on as an instructor. Teaching what she showed was possible." A sudden alert cut through their conversation. "Sir, we've lost primary communications with the Apache." An operator called out. "Switch to emergency frequencies," Blackwood ordered, returning to the main console. "Already tried, sir. No response." The tracking screen showed the helicopter's position at the edge of the storm system. Then the signal flickered and disappeared. "What happened?" Blackwood demanded. "Storm interference, sir. Tracking systems can't penetrate the cloud density." The command center erupted into controlled chaos as operators attempted to re-establish contact. Minutes stretched into an hour with no communication. "Last known trajectory?" Blackwood asked. "Heading directly into the worst of the storm, sir. Straight toward the extraction point." Evander stood perfectly still, his face betraying nothing as he stared at the empty tracking screen. In the helicopter, conditions had deteriorated beyond anything in standard training scenarios. Visibility dropped to near zero as snow and ice battered the windshield. The Apache shuddered violently as wind gusts hammered it from all directions. "We've lost communications with base," Ridge reported, his voice calm despite the strain evident in his posture. "Navigation systems compromised by magnetic interference. Astrid nodded, her focus absolute as she fought to keep the helicopter stable. Switch to manual flight controls. We'll navigate by terrain mapping. Terrain mapping unreliable in these conditions. Then we'll use the experimental system. She flipped a series of switches, activating a prototype interface that began rendering three-dimensional models of the mountain terrain through the storm interference. Ridge looked surprised. Is that the Thunderbird system? I thought it wasn't field ready. It wasn't until now. The helicopter continued through the storm, following a path only Astrid seemed able to discern. The violence of the turbulence increased, throwing them against their restraints as the Apache fought against forces that threatened to tear it apart. Approaching the extraction coordinates, Ridge announced. But there's no visible landing zone, cliffs and ice formations in all directions. They're in a crevasse shelter, Astrid replied. Standard approach impossible. Without explanation, she began a maneuver similar to what she demonstrated earlier, but far more extreme. The Apache tilted at an impossible angle, rotors screaming against the strain as it descended between sheer rock faces, barely wider than the helicopter itself. Ridge gripped his controls, ready to assist, but recognizing that Astrid was performing calculations and adjustments beyond standard training. This wasn't in any manual I've studied. That's because I haven't written it yet, Astrid replied, her voice showing the first hint of strain as the helicopter descended deeper into the mountain crevasse. At base, hours had passed with no communication. The command center operated in subdued tension, operators continuing to attempt contact on all frequencies. Colonel Blackwood stood with military rigidity, but concern showed in the lines of his face. Weather satellite shows the storm intensifying, an operator reported. Conditions at the extraction point are now beyond survivable limits. Blackwood nodded grimly. What's the status of the rescue team? Standing by, sir, but they can't deploy in these conditions. No aircraft could navigate that terrain. No conventional aircraft. Evander corrected quietly from his position against the wall. Before anyone could respond, a weak signal alert sounded from the communications array. Sir, we're picking up a transmission. Heavily distorted. Put it through, Blackwood ordered. The speakers crackled with static, broken words barely discernible. Extraction complete. 6 survivors. Severe conditions returning. Modifications required. The signal cut out before they could respond. Can we confirm that was Colonel Vonnick? Blackwood asked. Voice pattern match confirmed, sir. The room erupted in controlled celebration. Operators exchanging relieved glances as they continued working to re-establish communication. They found them, Evander said quietly, emotion breaking through his military bearing for the first time. She found them. Now they have to get back, Blackwood reminded him, through the same conditions that nearly prevented the extraction. 18 hours later, dawn broke over Fort Riggs. The storm had reached the base overnight, coating everything in a layer of ice and snow. Personnel gathered anxiously on the tarmac, straining to hear any radio transmission from the rescue mission. Colonel Blackwood emerged from the command center, looking exhausted after maintaining his post throughout the night. Major Calloway approached him, leaning heavily on his cane. Any word? Calloway asked, tension evident in his voice. Nothing for the past 4 hours, Blackwood admitted. Last transmission placed them at the outer edge of the storm front, but conditions were catastrophic. They should have returned or reported by now. Lieutenant Okafor, who had been monitoring communications, rushed out of the command building. Sir, radar has picked up an aircraft approaching from the northwest. All eyes turned to the horizon, searching through the early morning mist and lingering snow. It can't be them, someone muttered. Not through that storm, not carrying extra personnel. The distant thudding of rotor blades gradually became audible. As the sound grew closer, a silhouette emerged from the clouds, an Apache helicopter flying low and fast. My God, Blackwood whispered, lifting his binoculars. It's them. The helicopter approached the base, maintaining controlled flight despite visible battle damage. Ice coated much of its exterior, and one rotor blade showed signs of severe stress. As it neared, they could see additional equipment strapped to the exterior. Makeshift transport modifications that were never part of any design specification. The Apache touched down on the frost-covered tarmac, rotors slowing as medical teams rushed forward from their standby positions. The cockpit opened to reveal Astrid, exhausted but alert, and Captain Ridge beside her, looking similarly drained. From the hastily modified external compartments, medical personnel helped extract 6 Special Forces operatives, all showing signs of exposure and injury, but alive. Among them was Major Zeke Calloway, Evander's brother, his face pale from oxygen deprivation, but conscious. As Astrid descended from the cockpit, she removed her helmet, revealing a gash across her forehead that had bled down the side of her face. Despite this, she walked with steady purpose directly to Colonel Blackwood and rendered a perfect salute. Mission complete, sir. All team members recovered. The entire base stood in stunned silence as they witnessed what many had considered impossible. The medical teams worked quickly, moving the rescued personnel toward the infirmary, while maintenance crews assessed the damaged Apache with expressions of disbelief. How did you transport all of them? One technician asked, examining the modifications to the helicopter's exterior. This configuration shouldn't be aerodynamically possible. Before Astrid could respond, Zeke Calloway broke away from the medics attending him and approached. Despite his weakened state, he stood tall as he addressed Blackwood. She modified the helicopter in the field, sir, he explained, his voice weak but determined. When the storm made extraction impossible, she reconfigured the weapons mounts to create secure transport positions. That's not in any manual, Blackwood noted, inspecting the improvised harness systems. Neither was surviving, Zeke responded simply. We were buried in an avalanche when she arrived. Oxygen nearly gone. He looked at Astrid with profound gratitude. She landed on a ledge that shouldn't have held the weight, then dug us out by hand when the storm knocked out the rescue equipment. Evander made his way through the crowd to embrace his brother, emotion overcoming his usual military bearing. When they separated, he turned to Astrid. Twice now, he said simply. Twice you brought a Calloway home when no one else would try. The temperature dropped suddenly as a new wave of the storm system passed over the base. Snow began falling in heavy sheets, a curtain of white that seemed to isolate the group on the tarmac from the rest of the world. Colonel Blackwood surveyed the scene, taking in the damaged helicopter, the rescued team, and Colonel Vonnick, standing despite her injuries. The man who had once dismissed her capabilities now saw clearly what had always been there. Get everyone to the infirmary, he ordered. Full medical assessment for all personnel. As they moved toward the buildings, the snowfall intensified, nearly obscuring visibility. Through the whiteness, the silhouette of the modified Apache stood as a monument to what had been accomplished. In the medical center, doctors worked to treat the various injuries while debriefing teams waited to record the mission details. Astrid sat on an examination table as a medic cleaned the wound on her forehead. 14 stitches, Colonel, the doctor announced. You'll have a scar. Add it to the collection, she replied, her voice showing fatigue for the first time. Across the room, Evander and Zeke Calloway were reunited, the brothers speaking in low voices as medical staff worked around them. Occasionally, one or both would glance toward Astrid, their expressions filled with something beyond simple gratitude. Colonel Blackwood entered, carrying a stack of official forms. He approached Astrid's examination table, dismissing the medical staff with a gesture. Your preliminary mission report, he said, placing the forms beside her. But before you complete it, there's something you should know. Astrid waited silently. The systems you used, the modifications you made in the field, they weren't just about saving those men. Blackwood's voice carried a new respect. They proved the viability of the entire Thunderbird initiative. That was always the objective, sir. The objective was to test the systems under controlled conditions, he corrected. What you did was demonstrate them under the worst possible circumstances and succeed beyond what anyone thought possible. He paused, searching for words. I owe you an apology, Colonel Vonnegut. I let preconceptions cloud my judgment. You did exactly what the program needed, sir, Astrid replied. You evaluated the techniques on their merits, not on who was implementing them. But I didn't, Blackwood admitted. Not at first. I saw what I expected to see, not what was actually before me. Before Astrid could respond, a commotion at the entrance drew their attention. A team of high-ranking officers had arrived, moving with the purposeful energy that indicated major developments. Sir, an aide announced from the doorway, Joint Chiefs representatives are requesting immediate debriefing with Colonel Vonnegut. Operation Thunderbird has been upgraded to priority status. Blackwood nodded. Tell them she'll be available after medical clearance. Sir, they're insisting. They can wait 15 minutes. Blackwood cut him off firmly. Colonel Vonnegut just pulled off the impossible. She's earned a moment's rest. The aide retreated, and Blackwood turned back to Astrid. Whatever comes next, this base stands ready to support the new division under your command. As he left, Evander approached Astrid's examination table. The brothers had been separated, as doctors attended to Zeke's more serious condition. They're saying it was impossible, Evander said quietly, that no one else could have done it. They're wrong, Astrid replied. It just required new thinking. The techniques can be taught. That's not why you did it, though, is it? He reached into his pocket and withdrew a worn photograph, the twin to the one she carried. He placed it on the table between them. Some missions are personal. The photograph showed 3 figures in desert camouflage, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling despite harsh conditions. Astrid in the center, flanked by the Calloway brothers. 4 years ago, you risked everything to bring me home, Evander continued. Today, you did the same for Zeke. Not for recognition, not for the program. For family, Astrid acknowledged quietly, touching the edge of the photograph. Some bonds can't be broken. Through the medical center windows, the storm continued to rage, snow piling against the glass as wind howled across the base. Within hours, the story of what Colonel Astrid had accomplished would spread throughout the military, changing protocols and expectations. But in that moment, as she looked at the photograph of the 3 of them, the accolades mattered far less than the lives she had saved. Ice still clung to parts of the frame, gradually melting in the morning sun that had broken through the storm clouds. Colonel Blackwood supervised the examination, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief as technicians pointed out particular alterations. She completely reconfigured the weapon system mounts, one explained, indicating the stripped-down hardpoints that had been converted to carry personnel in a blizzard with minimal tools and still maintain flight stability. Another added, the aerodynamics should have been catastrophically compromised, but she compensated with control adjustments that aren't even in the theoretical models. Blackwood absorbed the information without comment, his expression thoughtful. The Apache before him represented more than a successful rescue mission. It marked a paradigm shift in what was considered possible. Inside the medical center, Astrid sat through her debriefing with Joint Chiefs representatives. Her responses precise, despite fatigue and the fresh stitches across her forehead. The room felt overly warm after hours in the biting cold of the mountains, but she showed no sign of discomfort. Walk us through the extraction itself, General Harmon requested, leaning forward in his chair. Particularly the landing approach. The team was sheltered in a crevasse approximately 40 feet below the ridgeline. Astrid explained. Standard approach was impossible due to the narrow opening and overhanging ice formations. Yet you found a way in. I implemented an inverted descent using rotor momentum to control the rate of vertical drop. Her tone remained matter-of-fact, as though describing a routine maneuver. The technique allows for precision placement in confined spaces. The general exchanged glances with his colleagues. That technique isn't in any training program. It will be, Astrid replied simply. As the debriefing continued, Colonel Blackwood joined Major Carrington in reviewing the mission data. The telemetry readings from the Apache's flight recorder displayed maneuvers that defied conventional understanding of helicopter aerodynamics. Look at these control inputs, Carrington said, indicating a particularly complex sequence. She's treating the aircraft as an extension of herself, not as a machine with limitations. Can it be taught? Blackwood asked. Carrington considered this. Not conventionally, but with her methods, her understanding of the underlying physics. Yes. Then we build the program around her approach, Blackwood decided, starting immediately across the base. Word of what had occurred spread rapidly. Personnel gathered in small groups. Conversations centered on the impossible rescue. Many who had dismissed or underestimated Astrid now found themselves reevaluating their assumptions. I heard she landed on a ledge barely wider than the skids, one mechanic told his colleagues, in winds that would have flipped any other helicopter. That's nothing, another responded. The real miracle was flying back through the storm with those men strapped to the outside of the aircraft. Temperature was 40 below with the wind chill. Lieutenant Okafor listened to these conversations with quiet satisfaction. As one of the few who had recognized Astrid's exceptional abilities from the beginning, she felt vindicated by the day's events. By afternoon, the base had transformed. The Pentagon officials who had revealed themselves as generals now openly directed the establishment of the new Extreme Aerial Recovery Division. Equipment was reallocated, training schedules revised, and personnel reassigned to support what would become the military's most elite helicopter rescue unit. In the medical center, doctors finally cleared Astrid for release. She changed into a fresh uniform, bearing her new rank insignia. The lieutenant colonel's silver oak leaf catching the light as she adjusted her collar. The face that looked back at her from the mirror showed little emotion, but her eyes held the quiet satisfaction of mission completion. As she exited the building, she found Captain Ridge waiting outside. "How's the head?" he asked, nodding toward her stitches. "Functional," she replied, with the ghost of a smile. They walked together toward the administrative complex, where the official establishment of the new division would be formalized. The base around them hummed with purposeful activity. "They're calling it the Vonik maneuver," Ridge informed her. "The inverted descent already been added to the advanced training simulation." "It needs refinement," Astrid said. The control response was sluggish at the critical moment. Ridge shook his head slightly. "Only you would find fault with a technique that saved 6 lives when no one else would even attempt the rescue." Before she could respond, they were approached by a group of pilots, including several who had previously been dismissive of Astrid's abilities. Their demeanor had changed entirely, respect evident in their posture. "Colonel Vonik," one acknowledged formally. "The general requested your presence in the main briefing room." "Thank you, Lieutenant," she replied, noting the change in address without comment. As they continued, Ridge observed, "Funny how quickly perspective shifts when reality contradicts assumption." "It was never about recognition," Astrid reminded him. "No," he agreed, "but recognition has its uses, especially when it means the program can expand." In the main briefing room, a formal ceremony had been arranged with minimal notice but military precision. Base personnel packed the space with senior officers and Pentagon officials occupying the front row. Colonel Blackwood stood at the podium, his bearing formal, but his expression markedly different from the previous day. The room fell silent as Astrid entered. All eyes followed her progress to the front, where General Harmon waited with Blackwood. "Colonel Vonik," Blackwood began, his voice carrying throughout the room. Yesterday, when you demonstrated advanced recovery techniques during what was supposed to be a routine exhibition, I questioned your judgment. He paused, allowing his words to resonate. Today, those same techniques saved 6 lives under conditions that would have defeated any conventional approach. Your actions have not only rescued our men, but have redefined what we consider possible in aerial recovery operations. General Harmon stepped forward. 4 years ago then, Captain Vonneck flew a critically damaged Apache through enemy territory to rescue a downed team that included Major Evander Calloway. Her actions were classified, her recognition delayed for security reasons. He turned to address Astrid directly. Today, she has once again demonstrated that limits exist to be transcended, not accepted. The general produced a small case, opening it to reveal a distinctive insignia. By order of the Joint Chiefs, we hereby establish the Extreme Aerial Recovery Division with Lieutenant Colonel Astrid Vonneck appointed as its commanding officer. Applause erupted throughout the room, the sound amplified by the enclosed space. Personnel who had once whispered political appointment and diversity hire now stood in ovation for the officer whose abilities had so vastly exceeded their expectations. When the applause subsided, Colonel Blackwood approached the podium once more. Before we conclude this ceremony, there is one more matter to address. He reached up to his uniform collar and, in a gesture that stunned everyone present, unpinned his commander's insignia. Holding it in his palm, he turned to Astrid. This belongs with someone who understands what leadership truly means, he said, extending his hand. Not just directing others, but showing them what's possible by example. The room fell completely silent as Astrid accepted the pin, a symbolic passing of authority that went beyond formal rank. Blackwood offered a crisp salute, which she returned with equal precision. The Apache program is yours to direct, Colonel Vonneck, he said. We all look forward to learning what else we've assumed was impossible. As the ceremony concluded, personnel approached to congratulate Astrid and pledge their support for the new division. The transformation in attitude was remarkable. Respect had replaced skepticism. Admiration had supplanted doubt. Later in the medical center, Astrid sat beside Evander and Zeke Calloway as a doctor completed her final check of her injuries. The brothers were recovering well, though Zeke still showed signs of the ordeal he had endured. The new program, Evander said quietly. It's really happening. Astrid nodded. Training begins next week. Lieutenant Okafor will be among the first class. And you'll be running it, Zeke added. About damn time. It was never about the recognition, Astrid reminded them. No, Evander agreed, taking her hand. It was about changing what's possible. He placed the worn photograph on the table between them, now revealed to show the 3 of them from years earlier, before his injury, before her sacrifice. Some things don't change, he said softly. Some bonds can't be broken. Astrid studied the photograph, allowing herself a moment of reflection. The faces looking back at her belonged to a different time, when possibilities seemed limitless, and the costs of pushing boundaries remained theoretical. Now they all carried the marks of those costs, visible and invisible. What happens next? Zeke asked, breaking the moment. We build the program, Astrid replied. Develop the techniques, train pilots who can execute them. You make it sound so straightforward, Evander observed. The principles are, she said. It's the implementation that requires adaptation. A knock at the door interrupted them. Lieutenant Okafor entered, her posture formal despite her evident enthusiasm. Colonel Vonneck, the simulators have been updated with the preliminary data from your mission. The General requested you review the modifications when you're available. Thank you, Lieutenant. I'll be there shortly. As Okafor left, Zeke shook his head slightly. Not even a full day after the mission, and they're already building training programs. Time is critical, Astrid replied. The techniques need refinement before full implementation. Always working, Evander noted, a hint of affection in his voice. Some things really don't change. The next morning broke clear and cold over Fort Riggs. The storm had passed, leaving behind transformed landscapes and transformed perspectives. Maintenance crews worked to restore the modified Apache to standard configuration, though extensive documentation ensured that every adaptation Astrid had made would be studied and potentially incorporated into future designs. In the simulator lab, Astrid supervised as technicians finalized the programming for the new training modules. The room hummed with activity, personnel moving with renewed purpose as they prepared for the first class of pilots to be trained in the extreme aerial recovery techniques. Colonel Blackwood entered, now wearing the standard insignia of a base commander rather than the distinctive pin he had given to Astrid. He observed the activity with approval. "Progress?" he asked, approaching her. "The basic modules are operational," she reported. "Advanced scenarios will require further development." Blackwood nodded, then lowered his voice. "There's something you should know. Your actions yesterday have attracted attention beyond military channels. Civilian rescue organizations have requested access to your techniques for mountain rescue operations." Astrid raised an eyebrow. "Initially, yes, but the applications extend to disaster response, remote medical evacuation, even space recovery planning. The techniques would need adaptation for civilian aircraft, which is why they want you to consult," Blackwood explained. "Your understanding of the underlying principles transcends specific platforms." Before she could respond, Lieutenant Okafor approached with a tablet. "Ma'am, the first training roster is ready for your approval." Astrid reviewed the list of names. "Add Jensen and Park from the 10th Mountain Division," she instructed. "Their experience with high-altitude operations will be valuable." "Yes, ma'am." Okafor made the additions, then hesitated. "Colonel, may I ask you something?" "Go ahead, Lieutenant." "When Colonel Blackwood was undermining you all those months, how did you stay focused? How did you not let it affect you?" Astrid considered the question carefully. The room around them had quieted, other personnel subtly listening for her response. Even Blackwood waited, interested in her answer. "I remembered something my father taught me," Astrid finally said. "True capability speaks for itself. Eventually, even the most reluctant ears will hear it." She looked across the lab where simulations of the Apache maneuvers played on multiple screens. "Sometimes respect isn't given by rank. Sometimes it's earned at 10,000 feet. Okafor nodded, absorbing the lesson. "Thank you, ma'am." As the lieutenant returned to her duties, Blackwood observed, "Wise words. Your father was military." "Test pilot," Astrid replied. "He believed limitations were mostly psychological, not physical." "He would be proud of what you've accomplished," Blackwood said, then checked his watch. "The first official briefing for the new division begins in 30 minutes. The Pentagon team wants to discuss global implementation." 1 month later, Fort Riggs had been transformed. What began as a standard military base now served as the headquarters for the Extreme Aerial Recovery Division, with expanded facilities and specialized equipment. Pilots from across the armed forces applied for positions, all eager to learn the techniques that had redefined aerial rescue operations. Colonel Blackwood stood before a new class of pilots, including Lieutenant Okafor and several other female officers who had transferred to Fort Riggs specifically for the program. The briefing room, once the scene of skepticism and subtle undermining, now vibrated with anticipation and respect. "When Colonel Vonnick first arrived at this base," Blackwood began, "I saw only what I expected to see, not what was actually before me. That failure of perception nearly cost lives." He gestured to where Astrid now stood. wearing her new rank insignia and the commander's pin he had given her. The Extreme Aerial Recovery Division represents more than new techniques. It represents a new standard, one where we judge ability, not appearance, results, not assumptions. Astrid stepped forward to address the class. "The Apache is not a toy," she said, echoing Blackwood's earlier mockery, but transforming it. "It's the most versatile attack helicopter ever built, and in the right hands, it can do the impossible." She surveyed the diverse group before her. "My job is to help you become those right hands, regardless of who you are or what others believe you capable of." The class listened with rapt attention, aware they were witnessing the beginning of something historic. When the briefing concluded, they moved to the simulators, where the first practical training would begin. Outside, the base continued its daily operations, but with a noticeable difference in atmosphere. Personnel moved with renewed purpose. Conversations focused on possibilities rather than limitations. The skepticism that had once permeated interactions with Astrid had been replaced by respect that extended to all pilots, regardless of background. In her new office, Astrid reviewed mission parameters for upcoming training exercises. The space reflected her approach, functional and unadorned, except for a single framed photograph on her desk. The image of her with the Calloway brothers now visible to anyone who entered. A knock at her door preceded Colonel Blackwood's entrance. "The Secretary of Defense is impressed with the program's progress," he reported. "Funding has been approved for expansion to 3 additional bases." "Good," Astrid replied. "We'll need the capacity as applications increase." Blackwood hesitated, then added, "There's something else. Major Evander Calloway has been approved as head instructor for the theoretical components of the program. His understanding of your techniques, combined with his teaching experience, made him the obvious choice." Astrid's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes suggested satisfaction. "He'll be an asset to the program." "I thought you might say that." Blackwood nodded. "He reports next week." After he left, Astrid allowed herself a moment of reflection. The worn photograph on her desk represented not just personal connections, but the foundation of what she had built. Every technique, every innovation began with the desperate flight to save Evander and his team. What started as necessity had evolved into methodology and now into doctrine. On the training field, the first class of pilots prepared for live flight demonstrations. Lieutenant Okafor, now serving as assistant instructor, directed pre-flight preparations with confident efficiency. The respect she commanded mirrored what Astrid had earned, not through rank, but through demonstrated capability. "Lieutenant!" a voice called, and Okafor turned to find Zeke Calloway approaching. Now fully recovered, he had joined the program as a tactical advisor. "Major Calloway," she acknowledged. "The trainees are ready for the high-angle approach simulation." "Good. Colonel Vonnick wants to observe this one personally." As if summoned by her name, Astrid appeared, walking across the tarmac toward the assembled group. Personnel snapped to attention as she passed, a response born of genuine respect, rather than mere protocol. The Apache helicopters waited on the field. Machines once considered bound by rigid operational parameters, now recognized as platforms for innovation. Pilots approached them with new understanding, seeing possibilities where once they saw only limitations. Astrid surveyed the scene, noting how much had changed in so short a time. The base that had once marginalized her now centered its operations around her methods. The officers who had dismissed her now sought her approval. The system that had buried her accomplishments now celebrated them. But more important than any personal vindication was the transformation in capability. Lives that would have been lost could now be saved. Missions once deemed impossible were now achievable. Boundaries had been redrawn, not just for her, but for all who followed. As the training exercises began, Astrid stood with Blackwood, watching the pilots attempt their first complex maneuvers. Some succeeded, others struggled. All learned. They're improving faster than expected, Blackwood observed. The techniques align with natural instincts once preconceptions are removed, Astrid explained. Pilots already know how to push boundaries. They just need permission and methodology. Permission, Blackwood repeated thoughtfully. Something we were too slow to grant. But not too late, she reminded him. The conversation paused as they watched Lieutenant Okafor execute a perfect recovery maneuver, her Apache responding with the same precision Astrid had demonstrated. The observation deck erupted in applause, recognition of excellence now freely given, regardless of who displayed it. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the base, the day's training concluded. Pilots gathered for debriefing, eager to analyze their performance and improve. The atmosphere contained none of the tension that had once characterized such sessions, replaced by collaborative energy and shared purpose. Astrid made her way toward the administrative building for final meetings, her path taking her past the hangar, where not long ago, Colonel Blackwood had cautioned her, "Careful, sweetheart, that Apache is not a toy." The memory no longer carried sting, transformed instead into a marker of how far they had come. Inside, she found Evander waiting in her office, his arrival earlier than expected. He stood as she entered, still requiring his cane, but moving with greater ease than before. "The program files arrived today," he explained, indicating the stack of materials on her desk. "Thought I'd get a head start on curriculum development." "Efficient as always," she noted with approval. "Had a good teacher." He smiled slightly. "Your influence extends beyond flight techniques. You know how so?" "The culture is changing," he explained. "Not just here, but throughout the program. Pilots are being evaluated on capability, not category. Innovation is being rewarded, not restricted." Astrid nodded, acknowledging the observation. That was always the objective. One you achieved without compromising yourself or others, Evander noted. No small accomplishment in a system resistant to change. A knock at the door interrupted them. Lieutenant Okafor entered, tablet in hand. "Colonel, the modified simulators are online," she reported, "and the new insignia designs have been approved." "Thank you, Lieutenant. We'll review them tomorrow." After Okafor left, Evander raised an eyebrow. "New insignia for the division," Astrid explained, something symbolic of the program's approach. Later that evening, as darkness fell over Fort Riggs, the base settled into night operations. Lights illuminated the airfield where maintenance crews prepared helicopters for the next day's training. In the command center, officers monitored global situations, ready to deploy the new rapid response teams if needed. Astrid stood at the window of her office, looking out over the base that had transformed from obstacle to opportunity. The journey from underestimated outsider to respected commander had never been her goal, merely the path necessary to implement what she knew was possible. A gentle knock preceded Zeke's entrance. "Thought you might still be here," he said, joining her at the window. "Some habits don't change." "Essential ones shouldn't," she replied. "True enough." He handed her a small package. "From Evander and me." Seemed appropriate. Astrid unwrapped it carefully, revealing a custom-made pin featuring wings surrounding a phoenix with the words, "Altitude defines attitude," emblazoned beneath. "The division's new insignia," Zeke explained. "First production piece. Thought the designer should have it." She studied the pin, appreciating the symbolism. "Thank you." "Small recognition compared to what you've accomplished," he said, "but genuine." The next morning, as dawn broke over the base, Astrid stood on the airfield, watching the day's first training flights prepare for takeoff. The Apache helicopters gleamed in the early light, crews performing pre-flight checks with precision born of new understanding. Colonel Blackwood joined her, coffee in hand. The secretary wants a full demonstration next month. Pentagon officials will attend. We'll be ready, Astrid assured him. No doubt, he agreed. After all, they've seen what you can do under pressure. A planned demonstration should be straightforward by comparison. They watched as the first helicopter lifted off. Lieutenant Okafor at the controls executing a perfect vertical climb that mirrored Astrid's demonstration from what now seemed like a lifetime ago. She's a natural, Blackwood observed. She always was, Astrid corrected. She just needed the opportunity to prove it. As more helicopters took to the sky, performing maneuvers once considered beyond their capabilities, Astrid felt a sense of completion. The techniques she had developed in desperation had evolved into doctrine that would save countless lives. The barriers she had faced had been transformed into bridges for those who followed. On her uniform collar, the new insignia caught the morning light, the phoenix rising through symbolic clouds. The image represented more than just the extreme aerial recovery division. It embodied a philosophy that transcended aviation, a truth Astrid had always known and had now proven beyond question. Sometimes respect isn't given by rank or title or tradition. Sometimes it's earned at 10,000 feet where excuses fall away and only capability remains. In that rarefied air, prejudice cannot breathe and assumption cannot fly. Only truth and skill survive. As the Apache helicopters soared above Fort Riggs, their formations precisely aligned against the brightening sky, they carried more than pilots and machinery. They carried a new standard, one where excellence defined acceptance, where innovation overcame limitation, and where the question was never who you were, but what you could do. The base below had transformed physically and philosophically. What began with mockery, "Careful, sweetheart, that Apache is not a toy," had culminated in recognition that transcended gender, background, or preconception. Proving herself, Astrid Vonnegut had created space for others to do the same, expanding possibility not just for herself, but for all who followed. And as she watched her pilots rise to challenges once deemed impossible, executing maneuvers with growing confidence and precision, Colonel Astrid Vonnegut allowed herself the satisfaction of mission completion, knowing that the true altitude was never measured in feet above ground, but in barriers overcome and horizons expanded. In the shadowed hangars of doubt and the stormy skies of prejudice, Colonel Astrid Vonnegut taught us a truth that echoes far beyond the roar of Apache rotors. Real respect is never handed down by rank, title, or tradition. It is forged in the crucible of action, at 10,000 feet, where excuses evaporate and only raw capability survives. For months, she endured smirks, whispers of diversity higher, and orders that clipped her wings, yet she never raged or pleaded. She simply flew. When the moment came, not in a spotlight, but in a blizzard that swallowed hope, she rewrote the impossible, modifying a war machine mid-storm, threading a needle between cliffs, hauling 6 souls home on harnesses born of desperation and genius. Her scars, visible and hidden, became the quiet signature of a life spent proving that the greatest barriers are the ones we build in our minds. Astrid's story whispers to every underdog who has been told you don't belong, every dreamer dismissed as just a beginner, every heart carrying a photograph of what matters most. Keep flying. Your altitude is measured not in feet, but in the horizons you refuse to accept as limits. What about you? When did quiet excellence finally silence the noise of doubt in your life? Share your moment of breakthrough in the comments. Let's inspire each other to rise. And if stories like Astrid's fuel your fire, hit subscribe. Together we'll keep proving that the sky belongs to those who dare to redefine it.